This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for July 17th through the 23rd. On this week's show, a band turns a silly love song into the beginning of the end for a music genre. A music festival trilogy that started out with peace and love ends with violence. And we say happy birthday to two music legends and a pretty cool record label owner who happens to be a billionaire. Back in the late 1980s, one city ruled rock music: Los Angeles, California. It was where hard rock snaked its tentacles out of and grabbed the rest of the world. Bands like Kiss in the mid-1970s and Van Halen in the late 1970s started the hard rock migration, but the 80s saw the rise of the hairband rock. Bon Jovi actually started the Aquanet hairspray revolution in New Jersey, but LA is where the trend took hold. There were bands like Motley Crue, Warrant, Winger, Cinderella, and Rat. Those bands put their own spin on the hairband style and sometimes added makeup. Lots and lots of makeup. They were the pretty boy bands who talked about good times and girls. They played shows at places like the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Troubadour. They lived the rock and roll lifestyle, only prettier. Their music was fun, but not too heavy on meaning. Back then, that was cool. It was the 80s after all. That was the decade of fun, at least for some people. Around that same late 80s time period in the same exact city, a band was quietly making waves who would soon put the first nail in the coffin of the hairband era. Guns N' Roses might have looked like their Hollywood counterparts, but their sound was somehow more raw. While Poison sang about having nothing but a good time, Guns danced with Mr. Brownstone. Slash chainsawed his way through their music with his thrashing guitar riffs, while arguably the rock vocalist with the greatest vocal range ever, Axl Rose, pierced every word with his 5-octave voice. Guns was the rock act that would beat the crap out of you and leave with your girlfriend, and all of her girlfriends. Their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, was recorded between January 18, 1987 to June 23, 1987. They tried to get super producer Mutt Lange to produce the album, but the record label didn't want to spend the extra moolah on a big-time producer. They even tried out Paul Stanley of Kiss, but he tried changing drummer Steven Adler's drum sound too much, so he got bounced. The group settled on Mike Klink, who had produced some of Triumph's albums. Recording sessions for it took place at Rumbo's Recorders in Los Angeles. The studio was owned, trivia time, by Mr. Daryl Dragon, who was the captain in the 1970s duo The Captain and Tennille of Muskrat Love fame and Love Will Keep Us Together, two of their biggest hits. The songs were already worked up by the time the group hit the studio, since they had been road testing a few of them while playing the LA club circuit. The typical way that their songwriting would work was that each member would work up part of a song on their own, and then the rest of the band would add their bits later. The group ended up having so many songs worked up that a few of them ended up on their next major releases, Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. Initial recording sessions took 2 weeks. The next month was spent with Slash overdubbing his guitar parts. Slash was really upset with his sound. His signature sound was finally found when he got a Gibson Les Paul guitar with the Seymour Duncan Alnica 2 pickups and fed it through a Marshall amplifier. Percussion parts only took 6 days, according to Steven Adler. Axl's vocals took the longest because he would sing one line at a time and would not move on until he got it exactly right. The rest of the band got annoyed with his perfectionism, but it worked for the album, so there you go. The musicians on the record were mainly the band. Axl on vocals along with synthesizers on the song Paradise City, Slash on lead guitar, Izzy Stradlin on rhythm guitar, Duff McKagan on bass guitar, Steven Adler on the drums. The only other person on the album was groupie and stripper Adriana Smith in an uncredited part on the song Rocket Queen. We'll get back to her contributions in a little while. After that was all said and done, the album was mixed at Media Sound Studios with mastering done at Sterling Sound, both studios being in New York City. Mixing was done by Steve Thompson and Michael Barbiera. Mastering for the LP and cassette versions was done by George Marino. CD mastering was done by Barry Diamant. Ted Jensen did the box set mastering at Sterling Sound Studios. Ted Jensen is also a really, really big mastering engineer who has worked on a bunch of albums that you definitely know. Mike Klink did the engineering along with the producing. However, he had Dave Riatzes, Micajah Ryan, Andy Udoff, Jeff Poe, Julian Stoll, and Victor Deglio as assistant engineers. As far as the famous album artwork went, the cover art was based on the painting Appetite for Destruction, which was painted by artist and cartoonist Robert Williams. That, however, created controversy, so the cover art instead ended up being the 5 band members' skulls on a cross, which was created by Axl and tattoo artist Billy White Jr. Andy Engel did the redrawing for the tattoo. Michael Hodgson was the overall art director and designer for the album. Band photography was shot by Robert John, Jack Lew, Greg Freeman, Mark Cantor, and Leonard McCarty. The track listing for the album was Welcome to the Jungle, It's So Easy, Night Train, Out to Get Me, Mr. Brownstone, Paradise City, My Michelle, Sweet Child of Mine, which beat out November Rain for the ballad song on the album. So November Rain was one of the songs that went on the Use Your Illusion albums, and it itself became a huge hit when it got released. Also, the songs You're Crazy, Anything Goes, and the aforementioned Rocket Queen. All the songs were written by Guns N' Roses, with Wes Starkeen helping on It's So Easy and Chris Webber helping on Anything Goes. Okay, now, about Adriana's uncredited part on Rocket Queen. The story goes that Axl wanted female moaning for Rocket Queen, so he took Adriana into the recording studio and they did it in the recording studio. You know, it. Did it. Listen, there's only so much I can get away with on these things without blurting out exactly what the it was. Use your imaginations, kids. It's rock music. There was moaning. Figure it out. Anyway, probably also a bad time to mention that Adriana, along with being a groupie and a stripper, was Steven Adler's on-again, off-again girlfriend at the time. Don't think he and Axl really talked that one through. Anyway, another story is that the moans are actually from a few different women who Axl brought into the studio. Dude was a perfectionist, you know. In any event, that's how they got the moans for that song. So there you go. Appetite for Destruction was released on July 21st, 1987 on Geffen Records without much fanfare and was generally not well liked by the critics. In fact, their second single, Welcome to the Jungle, which many people mistakenly think was their first single released and was released on September 21st, 1987, went absolutely nowhere. Their first single was actually a twofer. It's So Easy and Mr. Brownstone, both released on June 8th, 1987. Those went nowhere as well. But then they started touring, a lot of touring. About a year after their album Appetite for Destruction came out, a video for one of their songs started going up the charts on MTV after being released on June 3rd, 1988. It was a power ballad that wasn't like any other power ballad anybody had heard from one of those sissy pop metal groups. This one was harder, edgier, angrier, but still about love. Slash hated the song at first and thought it was silly. Ironically, it's mainly because of his guitar playing on it, especially his now famous opening riff, that made the song popular. After that silly little love song became popular, Welcome to the Jungle was re-released. After that, it was game over for the hair bands. When that silly love song, Sweet Child of Mine, cracked the Billboard Top 40 Singles chart on July 23, 1988, it signaled the hearse to be put on standby for the Pretty Boy hairband era. Paradise City and Night Train were released in 1989, helping to put more nails into the coffin of the hair bands. And then grunge music finished the kill when the 1-2 punch of Nirvana and Pearl Jam burst onto the scene in the very early 1990s. Through hard work and relentless touring, Appetite for Destruction eventually became a worldwide smash hit album. In America, it went to number 1 and sold over 18 million albums, becoming the biggest selling debut album of all time in America. It also eventually won over the critics, ending up at number 62 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time list. The release of Guns N' Roses' iconic debut album, Appetite for Destruction, on July 21st, 1987. Their silly little song, as they called it, Sweet Child of Mine, cracked the Billboard Top 40 Singles chart and helped to end the hair band era on July 23, 1988. This hard rock group managed to survive both Guns N' Roses and grunge music, although it was not easy. The group Def Leppard started in 1976 as the band Atomic Mass in the city of Sheffield, England, by school friends Rick Savage, Tom Kenning, and Pete Doubleday. Pete Willis joined in 1977 along with Nick Mackley, Andy Nicholas, Melanie Davis, Nick Hornt, and Paul Hampshire, as members were joining and leaving all the time, mainly because all of them were still in high school. Singer Joe Elliott auditioned to become one of the guitarists, but it was decided that he would instead become the lead singer. Guitarist Steve Clark and drummer Rick Allen came on board soon thereafter in 1978. The name Def Leppard came from a newspaper headline that said, Def Leppard, Def Leppard's Deformed. On July 18, 1978, Def Leppard, with the lineup of Elliott, Henning, Willis, Clark, Savage, and Allen, played their first gig in front of anywhere between 50 to 150 people at the Westfield School in Sheffield, England. That number has changed over the years with every interview that the guys do. It was a disco concert that was promoted by a guy named Bootleg Bill Couplin. He was called that because his bootleg record collection was legendary for the city. The story, according to Joe Elliott, was that Steve Clark was getting ready to quit the band if they didn't start getting gigs, so Joe asked Bootleg Bill if he could get the group a gig quickly since Steve decided that he was going to leave. They were so nervous that before the gig, they bought a bunch of beer and snuck it into the gig in the bass drum. Not really a great habit to start in Pete Willis and Steve Clark's cases, as you'll see later. They played 6 songs that they had worked up and then went off stage, which was actually just a bunch of tables kicked to the side, and got called out for an encore. They encored with Thin Lizzy's Jailbreak, and it was at that point that they decided that they needed to write more of their own music. Right around the time that they were working on their EP, the Def Leppard EP, Kenning left the band and was replaced by Frank Noon. By the time all of the band shuffling was finished and they released their debut album, the group consisted of Savage, Clark, Elliott, Allen, and Willis. The group released their debut album On Through the Night on March 14, 1980. The album originally did not do too well, except in the Sheffield area. Eventually, though, it caught on and at one time hit number 12 on the Billboard Albums chart. It also got the attention of legendary producer Mutt Lange, who produced AC/DC's iconic Back in Black album and would go on to craft Bryan Adams and Shania Twain's albums along with Marrying Shania, but that's for another day. Mutt took a liking to the band and would go on to produce the band's next few albums. Mutt and the band worked on the group's follow-up album High and Dry, which was released on July 11, 1981. The band did not have an official hit from the album, and the sales figures were not all that spectacular. The band, however, did have a music video for their song Bringing On the Heartbreak, which would turn the song into a cult hit, as it was one of the first hard rock music videos that the fledgling TV channel MTV played. MTV would play a big part in the group's success with their third album. The group got to work on that third album, Pyromania. For this album, there were a few changes. The first was that they changed guitarists. Pete Willis was let go from the group for excessive drinking, something that would eventually help to claim the life of their other guitarist, Steve Clark. Told you that was a bad habit to start off with, putting beer into the bass drums to help calm your nerves before a gig. Never do that, kids. Guitarist Phil Collen came on board from the band Girl to replace Willis. The band also changed their sound to a more glam rock style instead of heavy metal. Mutt was again at the helm for this one. Pete Willis actually played most of the rhythm guitar and contributed songwriting on a few tracks before he was let go. This album was one of those rare cases when the album came out before the first single was released. Pyromania was released on January 20th, 1983. The first single, Photograph, was released on February 3rd, 1983. What made the song and eventually the album so popular was that Photograph, their second single, Rock of Ages, and their third single, Foolin', all getting heavy rotation airplay on MTV, which by then was in full swing as being a cultural force and a major record pusher. The album was the second biggest selling album of 1983, right behind that album by some guy who wore a sparkling single glove and danced the moonwalk. To date, Pyromania has sold over 10 million certified copies. Def Leppard began work on their follow-up album, Hysteria. However, tragedy struck when Rick Allen was involved in a car accident of his own making. On New Year's Eve 1984, Rick was driving his Corvette down a country road near Sheffield when he came up behind a slower car. Rather than slow up and get behind the other car, he tried to speed up to get around the car. Unfortunately for him, he lost control of his Corvette, hit a wall, and crashed the car into a field, completely severing his left arm. Doctors frantically tried to reattach the arm, but eventually he had to have it amputated once it got an infection. Normally, that would be the end for a drummer. After all, you do need your arms to play. Rick, however, was a different beast. Rather than quit the band, Rick and a few other people worked out a drum kit where he could drum with 2 feet and 1 arm. What's so amazing is that the band stuck by him and didn't even consider getting rid of him. The band did get another drummer to help Rick with drumming when they played a few tour warm-up gigs in Ireland, but they soon realized that Rick was going to be just fine, so the idea of a side drummer was squashed. In fact, during one gig, Rick drummed with one of the bones from his severed arm because, I don't know, rock and roll? Joe Elliott also developed vocal issues during this time, but again, the band stuck by him as well. This is a tight-knit group we're talking here. All of this pushed back the making of Hysteria, but the album finally got released on August 3rd, 1987. Hysteria was a monster hit, selling another 10 million records, producing hit songs like Pour Some Sugar on Me, Animal, Love Bites, Armageddon It, and Rocket. Plus making Def Leppard one of the few artists to have more than one original album sell over 10 million copies. It also helped producer Mutt Lange to cement his place as one of the most successful producers of all time, after also having 10 million sellers with AC/DC and Shania Twain. After finishing up their successful Hysteria tour, they started work on their next album, Adrenalize. Tragedy, however, would strike the band again as guitarist Steve Clark's issues spiraled out of control. He tried to get help, but on January 8, 1991, Steve's demons caught up with him as he passed away. The band pressed on without him and released Adrenalized on March 31st, 1992. The album was a hit, although it wasn't as big a hit as Pyromania or Hysteria. It spawned the hits Let's Get Rocked, Have You Ever Needed Someone So Bad, and Heaven Is. Before they went out on tour again, they auditioned guitarists to take Steve Clark's place and found Vivian Campbell, who used to play in the bands Whitesnake and Dio. After that, the guys put out a bunch of different albums like Retroactive and Slang, but by this point, music had changed. Grunge took over and kicked Def Leppard's style of rock to the curb. Plus, they almost had yet another tragedy when Vivian Campbell was diagnosed with cancer, which he thankfully recovered from. Through it all, though, Def Leppard never lost their legion of fans, I count myself among them, and the guys continue to be huge concert draws. In fact, I've seen them twice. If you get the chance, go see them. Still to this day, they're a great live act. They also did a couple of Las Vegas residencies, and they still sell out arenas to this day, even if their albums don't sell 10 million copies like they used to. Throughout their career, Def Leppard released 12 albums, their last being 2022's Diamond Star Halos. They've been nominated for 7 American Music Awards, winning 2 of them in 1989. They were nominated for 6 MTV Video Music Awards, although they shockingly never won one, which is kind of weird. To date, they have not been nominated for a Grammy Award either, although they really should have been back in the 80s. Alright, so the critics don't love them. Doesn't matter. They've sold over 100 million records, and they've been called the 31st greatest hard rock artists of all time, according to VH1. Plus, they're now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The career of one of my favorite bands, Def Leppard, which all started when they played their first gig at the Westfield School in Sheffield, England, on July 18th, 1978. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. On July 22nd, 1999, a music festival began with a lot of fanfare. Unfortunately, it would end with a scene straight out of Lord of the Flies. In 1969, the original Woodstock Festival was one of those festivals that your parents and grandparents loved to talk to you about, even though they probably didn't even go to it. It was the summer of love, and they will tell you that everybody got along great, even though it was the summer of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, marred by many disgusting unsanitary conditions and an awful lot of acid trips at that festival. It did, however, ironically, make a lot of money due to the selling of the rights to the movie and the music soundtrack of the festival, not from the actual ticket box office, which was an utter failure. In 1994, the organizers decided to put together another festival. This one was really good, but was marred by the same problems as the original one. The festival did make a name for Green Day, Melissa Etheridge, and Nine Inch Nails, and Sheryl Crow, among many others. In 1999, the Woodstock crew decided to go back to the well one more time. This time, things were different. Instead of doing the festival on farmland like the original Woodstock and the 1994 version, they put on the festival on a former Air Force base where they could strictly enforce security because they had problems with it the first couple of times with the gate crashers. While the other 2 festivals had gate crashers and people smuggling in food and many other things, this one would have none of that. Since you couldn't bring in your own food and water, that meant that you had to buy it there, and it wasn't cheap. 20-ounce bottles of water and soda were going for $4 each. This was back in the late 90s. A slice of pizza was $12. Add to that a 1.5-mile walk between the 2 main stages across an airport tarmac that had temperatures of over 100 degrees without the shade, and you had the stage for some really bad things to happen. And they happened. Oh boy, did they happen. The music itself was actually good. It was the era of Rage Against the Machine, Limp Bizkit, Jamiroquai, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Sheryl Crow, and Creed. Even James Brown and George Clinton showed up. The problems began when the crowds became violent during some of the musical acts. There were reports of violence and assaults during Limp Bizkit's set. Then, on that very last night, tragedy struck. On the last night of the concerts, the Red Hot Chili Peppers were performing. An anti-violence group handed out candles. They were supposed to be lit for a vigil during the song Under the Bridge. Instead, they were used to set fire all over the festival grounds. The crowds burned everything, including a radio tower. They took out their anger about being overcharged for essential goods and being cooped up in oppressive heat out on anything and everything. There were allegations of assaults. Even MTV, who were covering the entire festival, pulled its crew out. If the first two Woodstock festivals were about peace and love, then Woodstock 99 could be called the festival about corporate greed and violence. And it all started on July 22nd, 1999. Time for some birthdays and passings. First, the passings. Linkin Park lead singer Chester Bennington was born on March 20th, 1976. Bennington found success with Linkin Park after the release of their debut album, Hybrid Theory, in 2000. The band's blend of nu metal, rap, and alternative rock resonated with a generation, selling over 10 million copies in America. Chester's distinctive voice, ranging from soulful serenades to aggressive screams, became a key part of the band's sound. Tracks like In the End and Crawling showcased his versatility and his raw emotion, and while Bennington served as Linkin Park's primary lead vocalist, he often shared duties with Mike Shinoda, whose rapping added another layer to the band's musical tapestry. Together, Bennington and Shinoda co-wrote lyrics, further solidifying their creative partnership, and Linkin Park continued to achieve that commercial success with albums like Meteora in 2003 and Minutes to Midnight in 2007, both of which reached number 1 on the Billboard albums charts. Bennington's talents extended beyond Linkin Park. He served as the lead vocalist for other bands, including Stone Temple Pilots and his own project, Dead by Sunrise. However, Linkin Park remained his most commercially successful and critically acclaimed endeavor. Distraught over losing his best friend, Chris Cornell, only 2 months earlier on May 18, 2017, Chester left us at the age of 44 on July 20th, 2017, the same day of his best friend Chris Cornell's birthday. We'll get to Chris in a few minutes. Tony Bennett rose to prominence in the 1950s, captivating audiences with his interpretations of jazz standards and popular songs. His charisma and smooth delivery made him a favorite, earning him the title the last of the great saloon singers. He wasn't just a performer of existing hits. Bennett possessed a unique ability to breathe new life into his familiar melodies, making them all his own. This talent not only revived classic songs, but also helped to create new standards like his signature song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco. Bennett's achievements are numerous. He won a staggering 19 Grammy Awards throughout his career, including the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award. His rich discography includes countless hit songs and critically acclaimed albums. He also enjoyed immense popularity outside the United States, performing internationally and collaborating with artists from around the world. In 2021, the world learned that Tony Bennett was battling Alzheimer's disease. Despite the diagnosis, he continued performing, with his final concert taking place at the iconic Radio City Music Hall in New York City. The performance was a poignant farewell to a legendary career. Tony Bennett passed away on July 21st, 2023 at the age of 96. Amy Winehouse, the British singer-songwriter whose powerful vocals and confessional lyrics captivated the world's attention, had a tragically short career that was cut down at the age of 27. Despite her limited time in the spotlight, though, Amy's impact on music is just immense, to be nice about it. Amy emerged in the early 2000s with a unique blend of jazz, soul, and R&B. Her debut album, Frank, garnered critical acclaim with its witty lyrics and her powerful, soulful voice. Amy wasn't afraid to bare her soul in her music, tackling themes of love, heartbreak, and addiction with unflinching honesty. This raw vulnerability resonated with audiences, particularly with young women who identified with her struggles. Amy's sophomore album, Back to Black, released in 2006, became a global phenomenon. Hits like Rehab and You Know I'm No Good showcased her songwriting talent and her ability to blend genres seamlessly. The album won 5 Grammy Awards, solidifying her place as one of the leading voices in music. However, Amy's personal life was marred by her many struggles. Her battles with her demons became a constant theme in the media, overshadowing her musical achievements at times. Despite attempts at rehab, her health deteriorated and her public appearances became increasingly erratic. On July 23, 2011, Amy Winehouse was found dead at her home at the age of 27. Her passing sent shockwaves through the music industry and sparked a conversation about the pressures of fame. And while Amy's personal demons ultimately cut her life short, her musical legacy lives on. Her raw talent, the way she wrote those lyrics, and her genre-bending sound continue to inspire artists everywhere today. Amy Winehouse's story serves as a cautionary tale, but also a major testament to the power of music to connect with listeners on a very deep emotional level. She is missed. As is this next lady, Billie Holiday, who was born Eleanora Fagan on April 7, 1915, was one of the most influential jazz singers of all time. Her life, however, was a whirlwind of triumph and tragedy, marked by poverty, racism, addiction, and a voice that could stir your soul. Holiday's childhood was marred by poverty and abuse. She dropped out of school pretty young and faced homelessness and exploitation, and yet her singing talent shined through. By the early 1930s, she found herself in Harlem, New York, the heart of the burgeoning jazz scene. Talent scout John Hammond recognized her talent and launched her recording career. Nicknamed Lady Day by saxophonist Lester Young, Holiday's voice was unlike any other. With a deep emotional resonance and an intuitive grasp of phrasing, she could imbue even the simplest song with profound meaning. Hits like God Bless the Child and Strange Fruit, which was a powerful protest song against lynching, showcased her artistry and her social conscience. Despite her success, Billie's life was a constant battle. She battled addiction throughout her career, a struggle that stemmed from early traumas. Additionally, she faced racism in the segregated America at the time. And even while achieving national fame, she was denied entry to hotels and restaurants due to her race. Billie's personal demons took a toll. Arrests, health problems, and the loss of her cabaret card in New York City hampered her career in the 1950s, and yet her voice never lost its power. She continued to perform and record until her untimely death on July 17, 1959. Billie Holiday passed away from cirrhosis of the liver at the age of 44. At the time of her death, Billie had been arrested and handcuffed a month earlier and was placed under police guard as she was dying in the hospital. The police pulled the police guard a few hours before her death, once it was painfully obvious that she wouldn't survive the day. Wasn't that nice of them? The death of legendary jazz great Billie Holiday on July 17th, 1959. There are some important birthdays this week, so instead of saying happy birthday to one person, let's go with three, shall we? This first man was born on July 18th, 1950. From his early days, he was a rebel. He still starts up businesses in order to disrupt sectors. He is quite possibly one of the few billionaires that you could see yourself having some fun with and not hating him. He's an adventurer who almost killed himself on more than a few occasions. However, he got his start and made his money originally by starting a record label. He signed Mike Oldfield, whose album Tubular Bells would be the musical background for the movie The Shining. He took a chance and signed a rebellious rock group, the Sex Pistols, and engineered out-of-this-world publicity stunts that pissed off everybody, in fitting with the Pistols' nature, of course. He signed the Rolling Stones, Peter Gabriel, Janet Jackson, Culture Club, Steve Winwood, and Paula Abdul, among many others. The man known these days for trying to change the world and bringing space tourism to fruition, but who also made a name for himself by trying to break hot air balloon records. The rebellious businessman who owns over 100 companies, but they all have his imprint on them, and his empire all started with his record label. The man who turned his record label, Virgin, into the biggest independent record label in the world, at least for a while. Sir Richard Branson, born July 18th, 1950. This second man was born on July 22nd, 1947. He is known for being a drummer for a very successful rock band who hold the record for having the biggest selling album of the 20th century. He and his band co-founder got their start as members of Linda Ronstadt's backup band. After his band broke up, he went on to have a very successful solo career, talking about the end of the innocence with the Boys of Summer and Dirty Laundry. However, after famously saying that his band would get back together when hell froze over, hell apparently froze over and the band got back together. They are still performing to this day after taking some time off to deal with the tragic passing of his friend and brothers in arms and co-founder of that group, the Eagles, Mr. Glenn Frey. The band is now winding down their tour, and after that, no plans to ever tour again. Of course, they've said that before. The drummer of the Eagles, whose greatest hits album is the biggest selling album of all time in America, with Michael Jackson's album Thriller being the biggest selling album of all time worldwide, Mr. Don Henley, born July 22nd, 1947. This third man was born exactly 6 years before Don Henley, back in 1941. If you are a fan of early hip-hop, then known as rap music, then you know that a lot of samples came from two different people, James Brown and George Clinton. In fact, they were sampled so much that they could have never have worked again in their lives and lived off the royalties alone, if any of those people actually paid them royalties for the samples they took. What James Brown did for soul and R&B music, George did for funk music, injecting it with a psychedelic blend, inventing a new form of music called P-Funk, and all with a performance showmanship that has often been imitated but never duplicated. George Clinton was born on July 22, 1941. He started a group at the age of 15 in Plainfield, New Jersey called the Parliaments, whose name he took from Parliament cigarettes. In the early years, their music style was influenced by doo-wop and vocal R&B acts of the time. They garnered local recognition for their soulful performances and tight harmonies, displaying early signs of their musical prowess. In 1964, George decided to get a backup band for the group and dropped doo-wop for smooth funk. His first backup band had Eddie Hazel on lead guitar, Tall Ross on rhythm guitar, Billy Bass Nelson on bass, Tiki Fullwood on drums, and Mickey Atkins on keyboards. The Parliaments caught the attention of Motown Records in the early 1960s. After Motown signed them, they released a bunch of singles, including the regional hit I Want to Testify in 1967. However, despite some regional success in the upper Midwest area, the Parliament struggled to achieve widespread national recognition under the guidance of Motown. Frustrated with Motown and looking for a new direction, the group underwent a significant transformation. Due to the record label that they ended up on, Revolt Records, going bankrupt, they lost the right to the name The Parliaments. The Parliaments rebranded themselves as simply Parliament, shedding their previous sound and embracing a more experimental and progressive approach. This transformation allowed them to explore new musical territories and break free from the Motown assembly line way of doing business. Parliament's evolution was marked by a fusion of soul, funk, and various musical influences, drawing inspiration from the raw energy of James Brown, the psychedelic sounds of Mr. Jimi Hendrix, and the eclectic nature of Sly and the Family Stone. Parliament crafted a distinct funk sound characterized by infectious bass lines, intricate horn arrangements, and Clinton's distinctive vocal style. The band's breakthrough came with the release of their landmark album The Mothership Connection in 1975. This album introduced the concept of an intergalactic funk mythology with band members portraying extraterrestrial characters. The concept became a recurring theme in their subsequent albums and live performances, sometimes with over 40 performers on stage and with the iconic Mothership stage prop becoming a symbol of Parliament's imaginative and theatrical approach. The Mothership stage prop is actually now in the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., along with some of the group's costumes, provided that the new administration has not tossed them out because they might feel that they might be too DEI for them. Anyway, in 1968, George decided to add an additional project to his repertoire. He took his backup band and called the new band Funkadelic, establishing their distinct musical identity and creating a whole new musical genre, P-Funk. Billy Bass Nelson is the person who's credited with calling the group Funkadelic. This change reflected their intention to delve into a heavier guitar-oriented sound while retaining the rhythmic foundations of funk music. It was also during this time that the band's lineup expanded to include such legendary performers as Bootsy Collins on bass and Bernie Worrell on keyboards. Eventually, after having both groups running separately at the same time to quench George's creative ideas, both bands would eventually merge into Parliament Funkadelic. There were also spin-offs of the band, such as Bootsy's Rubber Band and the Brides of Funkenstein. Funkadelic's self-titled debut album, released in 1970, showcased their experimental approach to music. Tracks like I'll Bet You and Music for My Mother epitomize their unique blend of psychedelic elements, distorted guitar riffs, and soulful vocals. Funkadelic's subsequent albums continued to push the boundaries of musical innovation. Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow from 1970 and Maggot Brain from 1971 exemplified the band's cosmic themes and experimentation. These albums featured extended jams, soulful ballads, and mesmerizing guitar solos, creating expansive sonic landscapes that captivated the audiences. While initially operating outside the mainstream, Funkadelic achieved commercial success with the release of their album One Nation Under Groove in 1978. The title track became an instant funk anthem, embodying the band's message of unity and musical liberation. This commercial breakthrough propelled Funkadelic into the mainstream, solidifying their position as one of the foremost funk rock acts of the era. Funkadelic's influence extended far beyond their commercial success. The groundbreaking fusion of funk rock and psychedelia inspired countless musicians across many genres. Their experimental sound, socially conscious lyrics, and mesmerizing stage performances left an indelible mark on the music industry. Artists ranging from Prince to the Red Hot Chili Peppers Two contemporary funk and rock acts continued to draw inspiration from Funkadelic's eclectic and boundary-breaking approach. As the 1980s came around, the collective broke up and went their separate ways. A lot of them went on to other projects, solo albums, or guest spots on other artists' tours. For instance, Bernie Worrell, for a while, went on tour with the group The Pretenders. Bootsy Collins ended up on a number of other artists' songs, most notably D-Light's classic dance track Groove Is in the Heart, along with putting out his own albums. George kept going with solo work and had the hit song Atomic Dog that got sampled a ton of times, along with getting put in various commercials and movies having dogs with them. George eventually put a new collective of artists together for the 21st century, named them Parliament Funkadelic, and went out on tour again. However, due to worsening medical conditions, he's either in the middle of his now lengthy farewell tour, as of this podcast anyway, or he's finally concluded it, and that is it for his touring. Either separately or as a combined collective, the groups put out some of the most iconic funk albums and songs of all time. Albums such as The Mothership Connection, One Nation Under a Groove, and Up for the Downstroke, and singles such as Stomp, One Nation Under a Groove, and Flashlight. They've also received a Grammy Award as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Recording Academy. When it came time for the collective to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the list of official inductees was whittled down from almost 100 different members over the decades to 15 inductees. And it all came from the mind of the P-Funk master himself, Mr. George Clinton, born July 22nd, 1941. And even though we're kind of going long, we're going to give you a fourth birthday because it is well worth it. Christopher John Cornell was born on July 20th, 1964. He co-founded Soundgarden in 1984. Initially playing drums and singing, he transitioned to solely doing vocals, showcasing his powerful 4-octave range. Soundgarden, alongside bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, emerged from Seattle's grunge scene, challenging the hair metal dominance of the late 1980s and basically finishing them off pretty rapidly. Their music, categorized by heavy riffs, angst-ridden lyrics, and Cornell's soaring vocals, one of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time, resonated with a generation disillusioned with mainstream trends. Soundgarden's albums, particularly 1989's Louder Than Love and 1994's Super Unknown, achieved critical and commercial success. Singles like Black Hole Sun and Spoon Man became staples on alternative rock radio stations, showcasing Cornell's songwriting abilities and his ability to weave melody with emotions. Soundgarden's influence transcended grunge, inspiring countless future rock and metal acts. Following Soundgarden's disbandment back in 1997, Cornell formed Audioslave with former members of Rage Against the Machine. The band achieved significant success, releasing 3 acclaimed albums before splitting in 2007. Chris also embarked on a successful solo career, exploring a wider musical palette while still retaining his signature vocals. He contributed to numerous movie soundtracks, including his rendition of You Know My Name for the James Bond film Casino Royale. Soundgarden reunited in 2010, continuing to tour until Chris's untimely death on May 18, 2017. Chris Cornell of Soundgarden and Audioslave and solo fame, born July 20th, 1964. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for July 17th through the 23rd. Thank you very much for listening and or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify.